were Muslims in Malawi long before there were Christians, but forces outside its control have always dominated Islam. Even its own followers went through a time when they were hesitant to state their belief.
I know quite a number of friends who have changed their names or who changed their names because they didn't want to be identified or associated with Islam. So you find a person whose first name was Yusuf, for instance, he would change to Joseph. Some could even actually change all the names of their parents just because they didn't want to be seen to be associated with Islam.
What is it that makes a person reject his own name? Why was the existence of Islam almost ignored for so long? Christianity has been well chronicled, and yet very little had been documented about how Islam reached this tiny country, which is also known as the warm heart of Africa.
The name itself, Malawi, is from one of the most popular local language, Chichewa, which means flames of fire. Malawi is flames of fire.
It's bordered on the south and east by Mozambique, to the west by Zambia, and to the north by Tanzania. And it's dominated by the third largest lake in Africa, right at the bottom of the Great Rift Valley, called now Lake Malawi, which stretches almost 2/3 the length of the country.
Malawi has got a population which is about 11 million.
And it has no real mineral wealth, no oil, and very little in the way of manufacturing industry.
Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world.
But the soil is fertile here, so that when the weather is good, when the rains have come at the right time and there's been no drought, it can feed itself. So it depends almost entirely on agriculture and on the produce of the lake.
Many Malawians follow traditional African religions, but most of them have succeeded in fusing the tradition with Christianity or Islam. Traditional religions in Africa don't have great temples or written scriptures. It is passed on in the hearts of people and is very complex to outsiders. Professor Alan Thorold's field of study as anthropologist is Islam in Malawi. He lived here to do his fieldwork and knows the people as well as any outsider could wish to know them. The Anglican priest here at St. Anne's is concerned about the rapid spread of Islam. Most Malawians are Christians, and according to the latest official census figures, Muslims count for about 10% of the population. Professor Thorold reckons that the figure can be higher, up to 18%, but Muslims here say that there are no less than 40% of the population. Most Muslims are, however, from the Yao tribe, a minority of more or less 10% of the total population. Malawians are spiritual people, and it would be almost unthinkable to meet a Malawian who does not belong to some or other religion.
Religion for us is a part of community life. One finds that we have a kind of common base belief in the spirit world, that not necessarily ancestors, but there's mystical forces that is there. Be it expressed negatively, like witchcraft, and sorcery and all that. But we don't dismiss those things. So this is already a sign that we are predisposed from our cultural standpoint to accept these things which are above our human understanding.
The baobab tree is known to get very old, even millenniums. The first Arab may have passed this tree in the 1500s. He was a trader of ivory and salt, and also a Muslim, but not a missionary. His trading partners were locals from the Yao tribe.
I mean, the Yao had of course, they were farmers like all the other groups of Malawi, but I think due to their contact with Eastern country, Eastern Africa, trade was in their blood. And therefore, they became easily successful businessmen, very enterprising. They had a stronger character, they were easier to relate with, they were more open character.
Centuries later, the Yao proved to be fertile ground for the establishment and spread of Islam. This minority tribe embraced a religion from the Middle East and married it with their own traditions and customs. But the first center of Islam in Malawi was not established in the south where the Yao lived. It was in a small lakeside village almost in the middle of Malawi. Lake Malawi is the great provider of food in Malawi. Every night, fishermen go out in dugouts or small boats to gather fish with huge nets. In the morning, they come back to sell their catch to eager villagers and merchants. Rajabu Ashani has lived in this village all his life. The lake is as part of him as his religion, Islam. Rajabu is one of a few fortunate Muslims of his generation who is literate. History has not been kind to Islam's followers. In Malawi, the practice of Islam has always been in conflict with Christianity, but there is also conflict between traditional Islam and Islam as it is practiced elsewhere in the world. This story is very much about the old and the new, the difference between custom and orthodoxy.
And it's also a more fundamental story of that great polarity that we see throughout Islamic history and that we see in Muslim societies everywhere, that polarity between the Sufi-influenced, populist, tribal variant of Islam and the scripturalist, reformist version of Islam.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة.
Islam in Malawi originates from more than one source. There are, of course, immigrant Muslim communities that come from places in Asia to do business, but the African Muslim community in Malawi is the result of the intermingling of Arabs and Africans.
Allahu Akbar, Allah.
The Islam that we find represented largely in Malawi is the East African Islam, which was spread down the coast from the Middle East, what is now the Horn of Africa and the Yemen, was spread largely through traders, travelers, adventurers, and particularly through the growth of the great trading settlements, the Swahili trading settlements on the coast.
Although the majority of Muslims in Malawi comes from the Yao tribe, the religion started in the central region of the country where the Chewa live, when a trader in ivory and slaves, Salim bin Abdullah, arrived in Kota around 1840, asking the Chewa chiefs for land on which to set up a trading post.
And then what they did was first to befriend the local chiefs, who had also something to gain through their association with the Arabs.
We're sitting here next to the lake at Kota, and this is the birthplace, the very origins of Islam in Malawi. This spot in Kota marks the place where Islam first arrived. It's historically the most significant, and it's certainly the point at which Islam and a significant Muslim community established itself in Malawi.
This happened about 150 years ago and is still in people's memories. Rajabu introduces us to Sheikh Kasim and Headman Kambo. They still remember narrations from their parents and grandparents about that time. They tell us that this wall stands on the place where the first mosque was built by the Jumbe for himself and his followers, and those initial converts to Islam.
He said that it is a mosque which was built by the first Jumbe. He introduced Islam as well as circumcision. After approaching the chief, he asked for a place, and then he was given a place. And this is the place which he was given by the chief. Soon after that, it's when he fought with those who were non-Muslims in order to make them to be Muslims. So some of them were converted to be Muslims.
Some of the
people who were being captured by him were sent to Zanzibar, and others were kept here, so they were taught about Islam. Jumbe himself was a Muslim as well as that Sheikh, but the one who was capturing the people here and made slaves was the real Jumbe.
Salim bin Abdullah's caravans used the route to the coast, transporting goods and slaves across the lake to Kilwa, Zanzibar and Mombasa, where it was transported to the Arabian Peninsula. Eventually, Salim bin Abdullah became so rich and powerful that he overthrew the local chief, declaring himself Sultan of all his subjects. Salim bin Abdullah and his three successors are known to history as the Jumbes of Kota. Suleiman Dodo is a teacher in history here in Kota. His family converted to Islam during the time of the Jumbes and were important people during the time of the slave trading. This is the site of the stockade where the slaves were kept by the Jumbe of Kota.
After slaves were collected, this was the first station. And from here, they were taken down to the lake there. My mother told me that her father sometimes said 3,000 slaves were accepted at once. But it was terrible because there were such gangs of slaves. There were many people. So to keep such a large numbers of people, it was difficult for them. So many of them were dying.
It is reckoned that Swahili Arab slave traders at the height of the slave trade in the middle 1800s have either killed or sold into slavery 80,000 to 100,000 Africans per year.
Some of the people corrected the slaves who accepted Islam, then were not taken as slaves. So those who accepted Islam, they were immediately accepted and lived together with them here. But those weak, and we can say, normally say weak or the young, some of them were taken as slaves.
Because a Muslim cannot enslave another Muslim. This is not allowed. So that's why these villages for freed slaves were established in these places, provided they became Muslims.
These bricks are the bricks which they use to build their houses. So if you go around here, find there are bricks, to assume that this was a village, a big village.
The Arabs were interested in mostly the chiefs, to convert the chiefs, get the chiefs to their side, and then a few people who were afraid of being enslaved. One way of escaping this enslavement was to become a Muslim.
That was the time of the Jumbes. They were traders and did not come here primarily to convert people. They did, however, persuade the chiefs to send their sons to the coast to get educated. Many of these men returned as Muslims who, on their return, influenced their own people to identify with Islam. The British deposed the fourth Jumbe in 1895. Slave trade stopped. The traders left in Kota, but the religion of Islam remained. Long before the time of colonial borders, Ibrahim Muhammad's ancestors lived in what is now called Mozambique. Ibrahim can see the Mozambican hills from his house. One of the hills is called Yao. It is also the name of Ibrahim's tribe. Driven by drought, famine, and in tribal competition for slaves, the Yao journeyed southwest towards the southern tip of Lake Malawi. The Yao has always been a proud nation. They were travelers, traders, and inventors. The Yao were explorers and soon dominated the region.
They were practicing agriculture and also iron smelting. And somehow in the course of their history started taking their forged object into the market of Kirwa and very quickly imposed themselves as master of trade and eventually became the dominant group who controlled the trade.
The village mosque in Jalazi is too far to walk to, and Ibrahim's solution was to build a family mosque. His Yao forefathers were slave traders and worked with the Swahili and the Arabs. Their explorations exposed them to new things and had an influence on their traditions and religion, their way of living, and even their architecture.
Traditional houses in most of the country were round houses. They were influenced by these square houses they saw on the coast and started introducing square houses. And we definitely see a complete different change in terms of architecture. Also in terms of products of agriculture. Also foreign trees were introduced from the coast, like probably trying to reproduce the landscape of the coast. Palm trees was introduced, coconut, probably certain variety of mangoes and fruit trees as well.
Soon, the religion of the coastal regions reached the Yao. Around 1880, the first Yao chief declared himself a Muslim. His neighbors soon followed him. That happened here in the district of Jalasi, where Ibrahim and his family had lived for several generations. The Yao's adoption of Islam had much to do with the arrival of the British in the 1880s.
When Malawi was declared protectors in 1891, one of the resolutions of the new government, the new administration, was to abolish slave trade and slavery completely. And they didn't have the patience to enter into dialogue with the Arabs, just fight them out, drive them out.
This was the moment at which conversions to Islam became very widespread among the Yao. It's interesting that they would do so at precisely this moment, because it would seem that in a sense it would have been counterproductive for them to be declaring themselves here as a Muslim minority in a British and increasingly Christian-dominated country, yet it seems to have been a form of cultural affirmation, perhaps ideological resistance to British domination, and a kind of declaration of allegiance to their own culture, their custom, and their history of slaving with the coast that had made the Yao the powerful and unified group that it was at the turn of the 20th century.
Yeah, the religion remained behind. The slave trade was abolished, and the Arabs left. And the religion was spread by local agents.
And there they were, a small religion still in its infancy, still learning to fly, with no power to assert itself. Forgotten by the outside world and threatened by the countless Christian missions that were established around them, they found themselves more and more isolated. And yet, they survived.
They were surrounded largely by non-Muslim tribes and ethnic groups, those that were gradually becoming Christianized. So they found themselves as a Muslim minority quite cut off.
Some were very enthusiastic about Islam, found their own way to Zanzibar, Kilwa, and other places, Mombasa, to get educated in Islamic studies. When they came here, they opened little schools, traveled around the coast, propagating Islam, and founded small Islamic communities.
But isolated and with little resources, the Yao maintained their religion in their own way. They established Islamic schools, and sheikhs traveled around the lake, giving instruction about Islamic belief and practice. By the beginning of the 20th century, Islam was solidly established in the south of Malawi, though not without accommodation to local custom and culture.
The Yao culture did not have any influence on Islam, but Islam had influence on them, because the Yaos are the followers of Islam. They follow the teachings of Islam. During that time, they could practice their own Islam.
These novices to Islam embraced the religion, and the Islamic influences became visible in respect of rituals marking life's most important events: coming of age, death, and marriage. Rajabu's sister is getting married today.
I think here they are waiting for the parents of that girl, as well as the parents of this man. So once they have come, which means everything will be ready.
Here, time is of no concern. They are used to waiting. The Yao Muslims converted to Islam using tribal practice to safeguard their identity from their colonizers. To the new converts, the doctrine of the Quran was not central. It remained a fetish of ritual. The unorthodox nature of Islam in East Africa is not a simplistic one. There is a dynamic interaction between pre-Islamic and Islamic beliefs. In Africa, ritual observance is the foundation of religious practice. Here, there is a common belief in a supreme deity. In the past, religious practice did not center on the direct worship of the supreme deity, but rather ancestor veneration. This is changing. The ritual of the marriage ceremony is important.
The Yao who converted to Islam were a matrilineal people, as are most of the ethnic groups in southern Malawi. And the form of Islam that they adapted and transformed to their needs was one which accommodated their customs and traditions.
The practice of the zikr, here known as the zikiri, where Allah's name and attributes is repeated continuously, soon replaced the performance of pre-Islamic dances at all ceremonies. Islam consolidated its hold on Yao converts and transformed itself from being a movement into more of a religious way of life.
They weren't Islamized, but they were accommodated, and certain Islamic features were attached to them. They were changed in some ways, and yet the Islamic practice, which grew up around the significant aspects of Yao society, were very much accommodating and open to the demands of Yao culture.
The most important ritual in the lives of the Yao is the initiation ceremony, which takes place more or less at puberty and where young men are allowed into the inner circle of Yao tradition and belief. Soon, certain Islamic elements were introduced to the initiation, and the revised version, known as the jandu, served as entrance into adulthood as well as Islam.
The Yao tribe, they didn't have that type of initiation, that type of tradition before Islam could come here. But it was brought by Islam that people must be doing initiation. But After being introduced into the Yao tribe, it was not practiced according to Islam, the way Islam wanted it to be done. Of course, the main part of it, the main element of it was being practiced, because the main thing is just to cut the foreskin, and that's all.
So circumcision, we find that traditionally among the Yaos, it's been practiced, and now it is, interlinked with the religion of Islam.
The jandu is a private and secret affair which confirms the loyalty and dedication of the initiates. These pictures are unique and have never been seen before by anyone who has not been through the ritual.
During initiation, they are sent into the bush where they built a shed covered with grass all over, from the sides up to the top. They stay there until they are recovered. The wounds are all recovered.
What you find in this place cannot be exactly linked to Islam, because those are purely traditional. But these are to do with the magical elements, not anything to do with Islam. So those are part of the traditional aspects, to protect, the initiates from being attacked by wishes.
You will be taught there good morals, but through songs, that if you go back at home, you must respect your father. If you go back at home, don't enter into your father's room, your mother's room. But they were taught through songs, using the drums there, sometimes throughout the night. At the end of the ceremony, these people now are ready to go back at home. They burn that hut. They burn it completely, they burn it down. The clothes which were used during that period, everything to be left there.
They now bury their old names, their old habits, and their old lives, ready to start anew as loyal members of the Yao tribe.
During the last day, the initiates are about to go out. They are taken to a river where they bath. Now, it is soon after the bath that they are supposed to reconfirm their faith, or what we call saying the Shahada, confirming that you will only, there's only one God, and that Muhammad is his messenger.
Their belief in Islam as the only religion, Allah as the only God, and Muhammad as his prophet is confirmed.
In that sense, tradition and the religion are some sort of enmeshed together.
So they go back at home. Now at home, people are waiting for them, singing his songs, drums, and whatever. Their feasts.
They return to the village proudly, meeting the girls who went through their own version of the jandu. choices that Muslims made earlier in history had an influence on their future. These were forces over which the Yao Muslims had no control. The Yao Muslims, in their isolation, brought about problems that no one in the world could have anticipated or even known about. In colonial times, 2 avenues were open to Malawian Muslims for their children's schooling. They could send them to the madrasas where the sheikhs and mualims were in control, but this education only offered instruction in Arabic. Here they learned how to recite the Quran and so gained status in the Muslim community. This, however, meant that they were practically illiterate in a country where a Western education system was in use.
People didn't know about Malawi. They didn't know about the Muslims and Islam itself in Malawi, how it is, the position of Islam. This is because Muslims, the majority of Muslims, are not educated. They are illiterate. They represent a large proportion of illiteracy in this country. Just because the elders, the forefathers, those people who embraced Islam first, they didn't send their children to schools which were built by Christians, like the Roman Catholics, the Anglican churches, just because in those schools there was a condition that if a Muslim comes to our school, the first condition is to make him embrace our Christianity.
You know that at that time, these mission schools were also regarded as agents for conversion, agencies for conversion. So the easiest way to go to join a particular church is to get to that school. If you're in a Catholic school, you end up being a Catholic. If you are in a Presbyterian school, you end up being a Presbyterian. And the Muslims had no schools at that time. So if they went to these schools, they had either to play their cards very well, not to end up as members of that particular church, or convert to that church.
Muslims, with reason, regarded schools as an environment which was hostile to their faith and which might estrange their children.
It was quite challenging, in the early stages, especially when you go to school. In those years, a Muslim child, was looked at as somebody else. It was very difficult at times to fit in with the other, children, particularly from the Christian background. And this was shown, especially when you are asked in class, how many Muslims do we have? You find that a number of Muslims couldn't raise their hands. They could hide. This just showed that, something was wrong somewhere.
There were early attempts to open schools with a Western-style education under Muslim proprietorship, but with only limited success. What was happening here only stopped in 1994, when Malawi was declared a democratic state.
And then when it came to jobs in government, the Christians who had been to mission schools are the ones who got the high posts.
During the early 1960s, legislation was passed which ensured that a child did not have to give up his religion to get a proper education in a state school. This did, however, not eliminate the Christian bias in the Western education system. Muslims were still reluctant to send their children to state schools initially, but this was slowly overcome. Time played a role in the way sheikhs and muallims interpreted and taught the Quran.
Their interpretation of what the Quran was saying is quite different from what I know now. For instance, there is a word like sadaq. To these muallims, sadaq meant, eating, or cooking, some sort of a rite, a funeral rite. And yet, the word sadaq in Arabic means, alms or charity or alms giving, so to speak. So, there was, that clearly shows that, there were muallims who did not fully, possibly they understood here and there, but they did not fully understand the language of Arabic.
A growing number of Muslims complete their primary and tertiary education. Literacy in English gave them direct access to information about Orthodox Islamic belief and practice. They got opportunities to travel and visit Muslim countries. This made them aware of how disadvantaged Malawian Muslims were, but also how far religious life in their country differed from the Orthodox Islamic ideal. From this group emerged a group who would play a key role in the revival of Islam in Malawi, but the revival came with a price.
Now, because of this exposure, there is some sort of a conflict, because these new young graduates from all over, Medina universities, Mecca University, from Malaysia, from all over, are now saying, some of these things that you are doing are not actually Islamic. They are actually, against, the true teachings of Islam. Now, as you can see, there is the old guard, which, has all along these years have a certain belief because of the distorted, understanding of Islam. They have clung to those, traditions. Now, there is that, some sort of conflict.
In a way, Mangochi can be seen as the Islamic capital of Malawi. This is where the Shire River finds its way out of Lake Malawi. Observers mistakenly deduce the lack of visible Islamic zeal implies a lack of commitment to their form of religious practice. But this is the heart of traditional Islam in Malawi. It is also here that we find the division amongst Malawian Muslims. Sheikh Al-Ghadi Saifuddin is a traditionalist and represents the Qadiriya Muslim Association of Malawi. The traditionalists felt that they were being marginalized. Slowly, they were voted off important committees and boards. Sheikh Al-Ghadi tells us that they keep on practicing their own version of Islam and now find themselves also cut off from financial resources.
But Qadri has no money. We haven't got money.
During the 80s, new mosques have been built all over Malawi, making Islam more visible and also giving confidence to Muslims. This was partly done with money from the Middle East. The traditionalists' opposition to modernization runs very deep.
There are some big sheikhs I know who have never stepped their foot into these modern mosques. They say, no, Islam has been sold with money. I have been a sheikh here for many, many years, and all these things coming up, I don't understand them, I don't like them. So there is tension within the community between what we may call progressives and conservatives.
I would call them apparent rather than real divisions for several reasons. Of course, I should also mention that those divisions do not just exist in the indigenous Muslim community, but also even in the Asian Muslim communities, we have similar, divisions that exist. They are fictitious, in my opinion, because the fundamental principles of the religion remain the same.
The progressives are symbolized by the Muslim Association in Malawi, which gets into contact with the Arab world, or the Islamic world, for aid, which is official spokes agents for Muslims. And therefore, there is a chance that this new movement is going to win, to take up, to control everything. Because they have the money, they have the contact, whereas these conservatives have no contact at all. Yeah. And as the older ones die away, that is at the end of them.
Masangana village is not far from Mangochi. The headman here is Sheikh Sufyan Masangana. He is also the chairman of the Qadirian Muslim Association. He does not agree with the new reformist movement. He is in favor of certain traditions that were adopted by the Yao when they accepted Islamic religion.
The Qadiriya people are practicing pure Islam. The Sukut people, the same, are practicing pure Islam. The only difference is just trivial, additional matters. Like sometimes they make zikri. You understand the zikri? By dancing. This is out of misinterpretation of zikri itself.
The zikr or zikiri remains the key component of Muslim ritual for many of the Yao. It is, however, also perhaps the source of most of the conflict between the old guard and the reformists.
Because zikri, according to the Prophet, according to Islam, it's just a remembrance. You remember God, you sit down, you remember Him by doing prayers. But these people, they said, no, zikri must mix it with maybe songs. It was a way of preaching to the people. Unfortunately, this type of preaching was not stopped once these people embraced Islam. And it was maintained up to this day.
Until recently, the contemporary Islamic movement in Malawi was in general confined within the country's boundaries. For many, it was a surprise that in 1994, the first democratically elected president was a Muslim.
Possibly he managed to become a president because the party, the United Democratic Front, mobilizes, or I should say all the parties tend to mobilize, their support on ethnic grounds to a certain extent. There is an element of regionalism in the political activities. So, yes, the religion is there, but we shouldn't pronounce it much, or its impact, as I said, is just emerging. But the main factor possibly for his success is this element of, regionalistic tendencies in the society, or the Malawian society.
An international incident in 2003 put Islam in Malawi right in the center of the world's attention. The arrest of 5 suspected Islamic operatives on the alleged involvement in channeling money to the Al-Qaeda movement captured international attention. Claimed to be on the CIA's watch list since the 1998 bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, the men were arrested and extradited by the US.
They were arrested, they were handed over to the Americans. Subsequently, they were released, but in the meantime, there was an upsurge of anger and indeed violence from within the Muslim community. And interestingly enough, one of the first targets that was attacked were the officers of the Muslim Association of Malawi.
The Muslims weren't satisfied with what MAM did, but MAM certainly did all it could to ensure that the rule of law and justice prevails on this matter. Unfortunately, I must admit that we were beaten in that respect, because I don't think the rule of law was the issue. I don't think that a chance was going to be given to the same.
Increasingly, the man in the street, the man and woman in the villages that belong to this community, this minority that we have described as the Yao Muslims, are clearly not feeling their interests and their aspirations to be properly catered for by either the Muslim Association of Malawi or the Malawi government.
The Yao Muslims have been changed. The Islamic practice, which they adopted and made their own, has been transformed, and their identity has transformed with it. Islam, which once assisted the Yao to sustain a tribal identity, is now furnishing them with an entire new identity. This seems to be an ongoing process and will only be accomplished in a new generation.